6:16, welcome back to First Up this Thursday morning. Thank you so much for joining us this morning as we continue to make the news and break the news. On the line, we have via Skype, we have Opposition Senator Dr. Amery Browne. Dr. Browne, good morning. Thank you for joining us in First Up this morning.
Good morning, Paul and Jessamine.
Good morning, Dr. Browne.
We appreciate you being with us this morning. First of all, the opposition has been making several proclamations through Dr. Keith Rowley, the leader of the opposition, about their thoughts on why this state of emergency may not be necessary at this time, given the fact that the anti-gang legislation could have dealt with many of the issues that we are seeing going through with the state of emergency. Can you comment on that, please?
Well, I certainly agree with Dr. Rowley. That is one of the very important points. Sometimes it's not what you do, but how you do it. And the government's approach and implementation of this state of emergency has been extremely poor. It began with the way in which they communicated it to the population, the way in which they've demonstrated their intentions, and certainly the way that they have been conducting their capture operations and then reporting results in really a very deceitful manner. Right from the get-go, the Prime Minister came on air and declared a limited state of emergency in advance of the President's signature. There have been denials since then, but I went on to the government's website, which has the Prime Minister's address, and it refers to the phrase limited state of emergency 9 times. 9 times. Every time she used the phrase state of emergency, there was the word limited coming before it. Anyone is free to go onto the government's website and they can see that themselves. Even worse, in reporting the President's declaration, now this is very unfortunate because I see it as an abuse of the President. The proclamation and emergency powers regulations giving effect to the limited state of emergency signed by the President, George Maxwell Richards. This is on the government's website, really holding up the President's declaration in a very false manner because the President did not sign any limited state of emergency. So they unfortunately are lying on the President. That was a bad start, and they started in deception.
Dr. Browne, speaking about the President and what some may consider these missteps or miscommunications aside, would it be accurate then to say that in light of what the President has now outlined as his reasons for signing the proclamation, would you agree with the declaration of the state of emergency in principle?
No, I would not. I really would not. The government has held this measure up as a last-ditch anti-crime measure. But when you look at every step that they've taken thus far, and you'd recognize that there are steps to make Trinidad and Tobago less secure. And I think that's what some people are missing, but more and more people are seeing. From making the borders more porous, the cancellation of the OPVs, the dismantling of SORT, which was in part designed to deal with some of the corrupt elements in the police service and give us some level of redundancy and another level of security, the issues with the SIA, the removal of police posts. Now somebody would have to explain that. In these same areas in which we are now seeing some very brutal and drastic action, police posts were removed by this current administration. And now these same people who were made less secure by those actions are facing state of emergency conditions, have had we all have had our constitutional rights degraded and are facing very drastic action. So the government's approach to the crime situation has not made any sense. And unfortunately, with this imposition of a state of emergency, some other questions have to be asked as to motive. They've held this up as an anti-crime measure in a period of crisis. But when you look at the emergency powers regulations that they have brought forward for the state of emergency, it does not match an anti-crime effort. It gives a picture of something very, very different, and I would refer to 3 of those regulations. Regulation 7.1 prohibits public marches and public meetings. I don't know when last you've seen drug lords marching or meeting, But clearly such a regulation is designed to deal more with a labor situation and more with civic unrest than to deal with a crime situation. Regulation number 13 prohibits, now listen to this one, Paul. This regulation prohibits possession of any document that can lead to disaffection or discontent among persons. I'm using the words from the regulation. Any document that can lead to disaffection or discontent among persons anywhere in Trinidad and Tobago. That is not linked to crime or an anti-crime effort. That's linked, I strongly feel, to the labor situation. And then the other one I want to refer to is regulation number 14 associated with this state of emergency. This regulation bans the use of loudspeakers either on top of a car or loudspeakers being used by an individual, held by an individual. That has nothing to do with crime control. Under these regulations, you can be arrested by a police officer or a soldier without a warrant if he suspects you are about to breach one of those regulations or are committing any of those acts.
Do you think this is directly aimed at the planned shutdown and protests by the labor movement, is what you're saying?
Well, what I could say is if it isn't, the government owes the population an explanation for the inclusion of these very draconian regulations in their state of emergency declaration and the emergency orders, the emergency powers regulations that have been issued. It would appear to any unbiased observer that those regulations create a scenario in which a different type of control is being exerted. Not a control on the criminals, but control on the civic elements out there that might be uncomfortable with the government of Trinidad and Tobago.
Dr. Browne,
yes.
Yesterday during the lunchtime media briefing, the Attorney General pointed out that because of this proactive action on the part of the government, they were able to avert a major situation developing. And he also indicated that they had put a damper, as it were, or at least made inroads with regard to the drug transshipment situation through and into Trinidad and Tobago, saying that they had managed to choke off a major supply ring to this country. He didn't give out too many details, but he hinted that something huge and disastrous to this country was averted. How would you respond to those statements then?
Well, we've seen the Attorney General deteriorate live on television over the last few days, and that is going to continue. He's looking like a very desperate man, and the government is getting more and more desperate to claim results because the population is becoming extremely impatient with what is clearly a smokescreen job. Every day they're going to be coming on television claiming results with no proof whatsoever. You saw what happened on Nelson Street and other parts of the country, including Cocorit, which is in Diego Martin Central, where they pull up with a truck. If there are young men liming on the block in broad daylight, they are harvested sometimes or in the night. And then to come and claim 117 gang members and gang leaders were, captured, that would be the better word to use as opposed to arrested, captured. You need to bear in mind that when these claims of success are being made, there's no verification whatsoever. They're being made by a very political Attorney General who is under pressure to justify what is being done by the government, to justify the damage to the economy and big and small businesses, to justify the increase in unemployment that must be a consequence of these actions at this time, to justify the perception that only the small persons are being targeted here and harassed here, and the big fish are sitting comfortably looking at the news every day with a smile on their face because they know that they are safe. I don't know how the Attorney General can say that they have made the borders secure and so on, and are strangling or choking any supply route when every action they've taken in office seems to be more liberating and liberalizing those routes and making our borders and our country less secure to guns, to drugs, and so on. The Attorney General owes much further explanation because it seems very counterintuitive at this time.
Dr. Browne, so you're saying that all of this is a smokescreen to hide some more nefarious or sinister agenda, in addition to the evidence that you've laid for a possible suppression of the trade union movement. And also you're hinting at the fact that our borders are being thrown open wide to all and sundry, including those involved in the drugs and gun running. What other nefarious activity is this entire state of emergency being thrown up as a smokescreen for?
Well, the depth of explanation is to the government. Part of our duty is to hold them to account. And this is why I was very disturbed that these actions are being taken when the Parliament, the Prime Minister got up and she opened the Parliament only to close it simultaneously. And these actions are being taken while the Parliament is not in session and there is not the opportunity to have really addressed the announcement of the state of emergency. Now they've convened Parliament way down at